Before we begin, take a slow breath, settle into your pillow, slip on your headphones, and if you're new here, subscribe so you never miss the next quiet nightmare. Now, let the woods take you. Story 1. The Whispering Cabin. I worked winters as a wildlife surveyor in northern Maine, where the pines grow like spears, and the wind travels long distances with no one to stop it. That year, they assigned me a ranger's cabin near Moosehead Lake, an old one-room structure of gray boards and stubborn nails. It had a rusty stove, a table with a scar down the middle, and a cot that creaked like a door whenever I turned over. No service, no power, a lantern if I rationed the fuel. Everything else was snow and space. The first night soothed me. The stove ticked, the kettle hummed, and the wind carried the dry whisper of spruce needles. It felt like the planet had turned its volume down. Even my heartbeat seemed polite. On the second night, I woke to a sound too careful to be wind, whispering. Not words at first, just the cadence of human speech lowered to keep secrets. Two voices, the way people talk in a church vestibule, in love with their own hush. I lay very still and watched the lantern's wick glow a little cold orange, nearly dead. The stove exhaled a last heat and quieted. The cabin breathed with me. I told myself it was the trees rubbing together in the cold. The forest has 1,000 tricks. Yet the whispering had punctuation, pauses, lean-ins, the shape of listening. I sat up, my breath clouded. The whispering faded, as if embarrassed. I unlaced my boots with fingers that didn't want to work, and crossed the boards that remembered every step. The window was rimmed with frost like white eyelashes. I cupped my hands to the glass and peered out. Snow, moonlight, a black line of trees so exact it looked carved. No prints, no motion. Just the kind of silence that makes you aware of the machinery in your own ears. The whispering returned. Nearer, like it had waited for my eyes to leave the window. I unbarred the door and opened it to the hinge's long breath. My flashlight made a narrow hallway through the snow. The sound cut off, clean, surprised, like I'd walked in on something private. The quiet that followed had weight. It pressed lightly on my scalp, my collarbones, the backs of my knees. Snow caught the beam and glittered like ground glass. Far back in the trees, at a distance that felt chosen, a single voice called out.
Inside.
Just the one word, cold and soft and colorless. Not a shout, an invitation. I shut the door gently. The bar went down with a thud that sounded too loud for one room. I stoked the stove until it glowed like a small red animal and sat with my back against the table leg, listening to the cabin's old heartbeat through its seams. Sometimes the whispering touched the eaves and slipped away. Sometimes it stood right outside the window and let me hear the thought of its breath. Dawn made a bruised light across the floorboards. I hadn't slept, just drifted in and out of the space where thoughts lose their verbs. I opened the door, and the day stepped in, clean and blue. That's when I stopped thinking it was the wind. Bare footprints circled the cabin, dozens of them, human, narrow, and unhurried. Some small, some longer than mine by a thumb. The snow around them was calm and unbroken. No tracks leading in or away, as if the prints had learned to appear without walking. They ringed the cabin at 3 distances like orbits, the closest so near I could have reached out the window and touched a shoulder. By the window itself, the snow was scuffed where someone had shifted their weight. Heel to toe, the way people do when they're waiting their turn. Scratched into the crust with a fingertip were 3 words, each letter a little trembling line. Let us in. I studied the words until the cold fogged my thoughts. It was the plural that troubled me. U.S. Not a trick of one lonely person. A group mind. A choir that didn't need a church. I packed that afternoon. The forest felt wrong, like a crowd had agreed to be trees, and it was trying its best to act natural. Every hollow hid a held breath. Even the jay that heckled me from a birch sounded like an imitation. Still, I did my job. Placed the camera traps, logged the tracks of hare and fox, checked the scat that told small stories about what had eaten and where. The practical world steadied me. By late blue light, I was back in the cabin with a mug of something sweet and bitter and a stove that worked hard. Night widened. The lantern made an island. I moved slower, as if the air had thickened, as if motion itself might attract attention. Around midnight, the kettle lifted its lid and set it down again like a punctuation mark. Then the whispering resumed. Closer now. No longer a secret among friends, but a rehearsal of my name. Except it wasn't my name, not exactly. It was the sound a name makes when the speaker doesn't have lips, when the syllables drag across surfaces instead of leaving a mouth. The voices overlapped and braided. They seemed to like the window, like the way glass holds an ear. I decided on a language. I said, no. It came out small, an object you could misplace. The whispering paused and rearranged itself. One voice stepped forward, if sound can move, and tried the shape of my number. It repeated it carefully, like learning a vowel. Then it said the word again, longer, tender, as if no were a term of endearment. Snow ticked against the window, though there was no wind. I set a chair against the door and another under the window latch because old habits help even when they can't help. I tucked the lantern low and lay on the cot with my eyes open, counting the spaces between whispers, the way people count the seconds between lightning and thunder. At some measure, I must have slipped down into a thin kind of sleep because when the tapping came, it lifted me like a hand. 3 soft knocks on the window. A pause. 3 again. The old invitation. The chair under the latch vibrated. The glass made a tiny complaining sound. My mouth filled with the taste of cold metal. The way fear sometimes flavors the air, I waited for the bar on the door to lift itself. It didn't. Instead, right beside my ear, inside the cabin, level with my cheek, where a person would stand if they were leaning over me to whisper, the voice said, very kindly,
inside.
The word curled into the blanket with me. For a long time, my body forgot what breathing does. Dawn took forever, but arrived anyway. Morning made the room small and survivable. Outside, the snow around the cabin was smooth again, as if the night had licked it clean. The message by the window had softened but not vanished. The orbits remained. And there, near the door, one new line written with a fingertip, crossing the threshold and stopping on the sill, as if the writer had reached as far as the rules allowed. Soothe. I left that day. I carried out what I had carried in and nothing more. The forest watched me without moving. On the lake road, the wind blew the snow into low ghosts that ran beside the truck a while, and then lost interest. Sometimes, when the apartment heat clicks in and the pipes whisper and the city's noises thin toward morning, I hear them again. Not words, not exactly, just the shape of wanting. Glass has a memory, so does snow. And I think certain invitations, once spoken, keep looking for a mouth. I can forget faces. I can forget roads. But I won't forget the way that word sounded when there was no one in the room to say it.
Inside.
Story 2. The Late Night Bus. At 19, I measured time in fluorescent flicker and registered beeps. The gas station off Highway 42 was more light than place, an island of buzzing white in fields that gave back nothing after dark. My shift ended at 12:40 a.m., if the floors cooperated. The bus showed at 1:02 if the driver was feeling generous. We developed a fondness for each other, me and that schedule, like people who pass on the same stairwell each day and never speak. Most nights it was only me and the driver, an older man with a cap that had learned the shape of his head. He had the stillness of a pond. The bus smelled like warm dust and winter rubber. Lights ticked. Heat whispered through vents. Outside, the fields showed a brief face in the windows and then withdrew, shy of their own darkness. The night she boarded, fog lay low along the ditches, gentle as the edges of sleep. She came on at the abandoned mill stop, the one people didn't use because nothing waited there but pigeons, and a rumor that the river kept an extra current under the floorboards. She wore a gray coat older than we were, and held a folded black umbrella like a sober idea. She made no sound when she paid. She sat 2 rows behind me and let the bus accept her weight. The driver glanced at the overhead mirror. I saw his eyes raise and lower, the movement slow, thoughtful. The bus settled into its route with small sighs and the engine's patient drone. The fields held a thin shine, as if the moon had been erased, but left smudges. I dozed. It's easy on a bus, the way speed becomes a lullaby when it isn't yours to manage. The gentle float of tiredness shifted to a narrower awake, a dream that remembered to breathe. That's when the whispering found me, a soft articulation, not eager to be understood. Repeated, careful, like someone practicing a line in a play. I turned my head a little, without letting my face belong to the turning. Her lips moved, but her eyes were fixed on a place the bus wasn't taking us. The umbrella stayed closed on her lap, a straight black sentence. The driver watched me watch her. His hands woke up on the wheel. "Don't look at her," he said, voice the size of the space between us. My skin remembered how to be a child. "Why?" He didn't answer. He held the bus more firmly to the lane, as if lanes are not just paint but promises. We passed the curve where the road loses its patience and tries to leave the map. Headlights caught the sign for County O and made it stranger. I told myself to obey, to trust a man who knows what a road can do. A minute stretched in both directions. Curiosity leaned. I looked. Her seat was empty. The gray coat still held the shape of shoulders. The umbrella lay open on the floor, wrong as a hand where a hand shouldn't be. There was water on the bus that hadn't come from us. A small wet circle grew and darkened the rubber mat. The driver murmured something I didn't know, maybe a prayer that had learned to ride a bus. and pulled over with the gentleness reserved for sleeping babies and old animals. The fields waited. The engine idled like a big, patient animal. He didn't turn around. "She gets on once a year," he said, without looking at me. "Same stop. Leave something behind, always. Something rain remembers." The heat stayed on. The windows filmed a little from our breath. I listened for footsteps, the slap of shoes on asphalt, but the night had retired from sound. We waited. I looked back again, despite the lesson. The umbrella was gone. In the rear window, the world condensed into a single image. A field, the slice of road, a smear of fog, and her, standing in the headlights' exhausted reach. She faced the bus with the precision of a task. Her mouth moved. The glass made her smooth and far. I couldn't hear her, but I could read the shape of her lips. The way you can read your own name from across a room. You shouldn't have looked. An old cold entered me, the kind memorized by basements and churchyards. The driver shifted the bus gently back onto the road, as if suddenness could offend someone. He didn't check the mirror. He didn't speak. We rolled forward into a distance that kept itself. I asked anyway, "Who is she?" He breathed the way men do when a story is heavy and full of edges. No one agrees. Once, long time back, a woman waited at that mill for a ride that didn't come. Another time, a girl walked home from a dance and didn't arrive at any of the houses she knew. Sometimes it's a storm, not a person. Sometimes it's the river practicing a face. He adjusted the cap like it could think with him. I just drive, and I don't look. We collected no new passengers. The bus sighed at its empty stops, a creature following a ritual that had outlived its reasons. At town, lights took responsibility for the dark. I stood to go and found the umbrella at my feet again. Closed, dry, ordinary as a rule. I hadn't seen it return. It pressed a small coolness into my palm when I picked it up, like a coin, like a promise. "Take it," the driver said, and did not meet my eye. I carried it home the way you carry a sleeping child, careful not to wake anything. In my apartment, I leaned it by the door. It stood with the patience of furniture. Rain hadn't been predicted, but that night the roof discovered its own percussion. I lay awake and listened to water perform its soft insistence. At 3:11 a.m., a hinge sound. Gentle, polite. The umbrella had opened by itself. It made the room smaller. Little droplets dotted the floor, though I'd mopped it dry. I closed it. The latch yielded like a throat. I set it farther from the door. At 3:14, it bloomed again. Quiet, exact, as if the air had made a request, and the umbrella wished to oblige. "You shouldn't," I said, and the word felt borrowed. It shivered once and stilled. In the morning, the bus came on time. The driver didn't speak. I placed the umbrella on the seat behind me and left it there like a question. We reached the mill stop. Fog lay in its old habit. The driver halted, the doors side open. No one stood waiting. No one boarded. The air arranged itself like a figure and then lost the shape after a very long moment. The umbrella slid gently across the vinyl and tipped into the aisle, a small bow. I stayed seated. My chest remembered how to move. The driver met my eyes in the mirror for the first time since the field. "Next year," he said, almost tender. "Don't look." I nodded like people nod in churches, agreeing with everything, understanding little. The bus gathered itself and rolled on. careful with the road the way you're careful with a fragile confession. At home that night, a damp ring had formed where the umbrella had stood, the shape of attention. I cleaned it and set a rug there. It refuses to dry completely, like a place on the floor that still thinks it's weather. Sometimes, passing a dark window, I catch my reflection doing exactly what I'm doing. And just beside it, a second shape that stands at the edge of the picture, as patient as fog, moving its lips to teach me a sentence I already know. You shouldn't have looked. Story 3. The mirror at Grandma's house. My grandmother's house believed in wood and time, floors that held memory in their soft give, wallpaper that had yellowed into a gentle dusk, a clock that thumped each second into the spine of the rooms. The hallway between our bedrooms kept its own weather, cooler than the rest, as if a draft had taken up residence and refused to be evicted. On that hallway wall hung the mirror. It was taller than I was then, and nearly as tall as I am now, framed in dark wood that had learned to shine without polish. The glass was old enough to ripple. It never showed you exactly yourself. It returned you after a small journey. My face came back a fraction slower, a fraction more patient, as if I'd already grown into someone else and the mirror approved. Grandma had rules that sounded like stories. Don't run with scissors because the house is listening. Don't leave bread uncovered because the night has hands. Don't look into the mirror after midnight because that's when the house remembers. What does it remember? I asked. She smiled with her mouth and kept the rest of her face steady. Everything that ever looked. As a child, I took that in the way children do. I believed it exactly, and also not at all. I avoided the mirror when I could, and glanced at it when I couldn't help myself. The way you check a pond for fish, even when you're told not to. The night I broke the rule wasn't rebellion. It was thirst. I woke at 12:30 to a dry mouth, and a feeling that I had been spoken to in a language I didn't know. The house lay on its side, resting between ticks. I stepped into the hallway, and the cool climbed my shins. The mirror waited without impatience. A faint light from the kitchen made a soft pillar on the floorboards. I walked past and caught motion that belonged to me and also didn't. In the glass, my small self paused. Over my shoulder hung a suggestion of someone taller, the way bright rooms sometimes borrow silhouettes from darker ones. I turned. The hallway kept its air. When I looked back, my reflection smiled. I hadn't. It was an unremarkable smile, polite, thin, practiced for relatives, but it wasn't mine. Then came the tilt of the head, not by a second, not delayed, but different. Curiosity from a stranger who knows your name. Stay, the reflection whispered. The word reached me without sound, the way you hear the inside of your own mouth. Fear isn't always strike and run. Sometimes it's something warm that sits down beside you and places a hand on your knee. I felt my knees become aware of themselves. I stepped back. The mirror's me leaned forward, like a friend confiding. Its hands pressed to the inside of the glass and softened slightly, as if the glass had a temperature and a give. I ran to Grandma's room, knocking with my whole body. She opened as if she had risen to answer a knock she'd been hearing for years. I told her the pieces I could shape into words. All her warmth moved to her hands, then to the hallway. She placed a sheet over the mirror, with a motion too practiced to be invented that moment. The cloth fell as if the mirror were glad to be dressed. Under her breath, she said something soft and old that touched the air and didn't leave. We didn't uncover it again. Daylight folded around the sheet and accepted it. Guests commented. Grandma said it was being re-silvered, and people nodded as if that explained anything. At night, I learned to walk the hall with my eyes lowered, the way you pass a dozing dog you love, but don't entirely trust. Years went by, as years agree to do. When she died, the house looked the same, but nothing inside of it knew what to do with its hands. I inherited the place. Sorting is grief's occupation. I sorted. The mirror stood in its sheet with the patience of old furniture and secrets, and I told myself there were bigger tasks first. On the third night, I woke at 3:14, the hour that had once held fear and now held mostly habit. The house had not changed its clock's voice. I stepped into the hallway to prove to myself that adult eyes see only physics. I lifted the sheet. The glass returned the hallway, then me, then something else. A child stood where I stood, but not with my posture. Her hair was my hair taught to behave differently. Her eyes were the color of a deep room, reflective, not bright. She smiled with interest, not kindness.
Welcome home,
she said in my grandmother's voice. Every part of my body remembered a time it had been smaller. I could smell starch and sunlight and the oil my grandmother used for wood. The child raised a hand, and I watched, certain I wouldn't. My own hand didn't lift. The mirror's did, the wrong echo. You've grown, the mirror's child observed. Not a compliment, not a reproach. We waited until you could stay up. I don't stay, I said. I sleep. She looked beyond me, over my shoulder, with the solemnity of children who are letting you fail a test kindly. You wake when we call. Behind the glass, the hallway widened into a place that wasn't my house, and also was. The wallpaper's flowers had more petals. A shadow traveled with intention. A person stood at the far end where no door exists in my world, and paused, considering whether to be seen. I knew the feeling, and I knew the posture. My grandmother's silhouette. Don't, I said, but I didn't know to whom. A handprint appeared on the inside of the glass beside my face. Small, not mine. 5 ovals and a palm, fogging the old silver. It slid down half an inch and rested, as if tired from remembering. I covered the mirror again with the sheet because there are times you don't need counsel to know the correct ritual. The fabric settled like a final sentence. The hallway released the extra cold. Morning made proof obvious. The glass had held a breath. When I lifted the corner just enough to peek, 5 pale shapes remained, as if light could learn fingerprints. I tried to be practical. I measured the frame and Googled resilvering and told myself stories about mercury and warping and how our eyes insist on faces. But at night, the house's weather returned, and sometimes the sheet shifted, a slow settling, a small pull, as if someone inside adjusted a blanket. Weeks taught me the gravity of certain times. At 12 o'clock, the mirror felt like furniture. At 12:30, it grew attentive. At 3 o'clock, it became a pond that had heard a name. I learned not to walk the hall then. I learned to fall asleep with doors open, so the house didn't have to push them. One rain day, I decided to move the mirror to the attic. I called a friend and said nothing true, only that it was heavy and I needed another back. We carried it with the sheet on, careful as if we were convincing a sleeping person to travel. On the third stair, the sheet brushed my cheek, and I felt warmth where there should have been only fabric and air, as if a face had turned toward me from inches away. "Welcome home," said nobody. We set the mirror down. My friend made a joke about antiques and curses, the way you do when you hope humor is a spell. I laughed politely, and the laugh sounded like a cough I was trying to hide. We left it in the attic's thrift store dusk. Dust accepted it quickly. That night, in my room, the wardrobe's door reflected a sliver of the hallway, as always. I turned off the lamp and lay listening to the small heroics of an old house. Pipes negotiating, wood settling, wind making deals with eaves. In the wardrobe's thin reflection, in the slice of hall I could see, the sheet over the mirror moved, as if someone beneath it was adjusting their hair. I shut my eyes like a door. Sleep arrived the way it does, when fear has tired itself out. Quiet and all at once. Sometimes I dream the house with its sheet off. Other times I dream only the word welcome, said by different mouths until the syllables lose their shape and become the warmth of hands holding a bowl. On certain mornings, 5 pale ovals bloom on my bathroom mirror and fade as the room learns day. I place my hand over them and feel only glass, only chill, only me. But when I pass the attic steps, I move slower, like the air is thicker there, and I am courteous to it. And I have begun to understand what my grandmother meant. The house remembers, not out of malice, not out of kindness. Memory is simply what some places do. If I uncover the mirror again, I know what I will hear. Not a threat, not a promise. Just an agreement being renewed by the quietest voice in a language I have always known. "Welcome home,"